Have you ever caught yourself right in the middle of a thought and suddenly realized you were thinking about thinking?
Oh, yeah. It's a very strange feeling.
Right. It's this slightly dizzying moment where you just step outside of your own mind for a split second and observe your own internal monologue. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled to have you with us because today we're going on a mission to explore the ultimate meta question. How do you actually know that you know something?
It's um it's a question that sounds like it belongs in a late-night dorm room debate,
Uh-huh, definitely.
but it actually sits at the very frontier of cognitive philosophy and biology. We're diving into a highly rigorous academic paper today by Tennyson Samraj. It's titled Carbon-Based Brain, Consciousness and Cognition Understanding Cognitive States in the Context of the KK Thesis.
I know that title is definitely a
A
mouthful.
bit dense, yeah.
But I promise you, this is a mind-bending look into your very own carbon-based brain. Samraj is doing something incredibly ambitious here. He's bridging this massive gap between abstract, centuries-old philosophy and the literal biological reality of the organ inside your skull. We are looking at how physical matter somehow generates subjective awareness.
Precisely. The goal of our discussion today is to decode the fundamental difference between simply having a functioning brain that processes data and possessing true epistemic awareness.
Which is what exactly?
That's the uniquely human trait of being consciously aware of our own knowledge. It's the difference between, say, a hard drive passively storing a file and a conscious entity actually knowing, feeling, and understanding that they have learned a fact.
Okay, let's unpack this. The entire foundation of Samraj's paper centers around this thing called the KK thesis. What exactly is that, and why does it serve as the starting line for this whole exploration?
Well, the KK thesis is a foundational concept in epistemic philosophy. At its core, it proposes a very specific dual-layered definition of knowledge. It states that to know is to know that we know.
To know is to know that we know.
Right. So if you take the letter K to represent the act of knowing, the thesis essentially argues that knowing a fact intrinsically implies that you also know that you know that fact. It's metacognition.
So it's not just absorbing information from the environment, it's the conscious recognition of possessing that information within yourself. I imagine this is where we draw a pretty hard line between human beings and the rest of the animal kingdom.
You do, yeah. To illustrate this, Samraj leans on the work of philosopher Bertrand Russell. Russell made this brilliant distinction regarding animal cognition. He pointed out that animals certainly know things.
Like survival instincts and habits.
Exactly. A dog obviously knows where his food bowl is. A bird knows exactly how to build an intricate nest. But animals are completely unaware that they know these things.
They don't sit on a branch reflecting on their own architectural knowledge.
Uh-huh. No, they don't. Humans, on the other hand, possess epistemic awareness. We are cognizant of our own cognition. You know the capital of France, and you're perfectly aware of the fact that you hold that specific piece of trivia in your mind.
If we have this dual layer of awareness, it requires us to look at the actual biological hardware pulling it off. How do we leap from wet physical tissue to this elevated state of self-awareness?
What's fascinating here is how philosopher David Rosenthal approaches this exact problem. He developed the concept of state consciousness. Rosenthal argues that to know that you know something, you have to be conscious of the state of being aware. We have to separate the brain process, the actual physical wiring, from cognition, which is the mental state.
That is the classic hard problem of consciousness, isn't it? We have all this biological machinery, blood flow, neurons firing, electrical impulses, and somehow that insentient physical matter magically generates sentient conscious thoughts.
It's the ultimate mystery.
Because it's easy to track the biology with an fMRI, but capturing the awareness is totally different.
Exactly. The biological brain processes are the necessary precursors. But state consciousness is the phenomenon of the mind waking up to itself. It's neural processes that have somehow achieved sentience. But possessing state consciousness, simply knowing that we know, is only the ground floor. Samraj then pushes us to consider the actual content of our cognition, knowing what we know.
Right, because once the lights are on, you have to actually look around the room. If we possess this internal state of knowing, how do we actually pull that information out when we need it? How does the mind organize all of this?
For that, Samraj introduces philosopher Ned Block's concept of access consciousness. If the KK thesis is the foundation of the house, access consciousness is the furniture inside it. Knowing what you know means the information is fully available to your conscious self to be utilized.
So it's not buried in some subconscious vault somewhere.
Correct. Block outlines that if you have access consciousness of a piece of knowledge, you can do three things with it. You can recollect it, you can reflect upon it, and crucially, you can report on it. You can pull the file from the mental cabinet, read it, and then hand that information over to someone else.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How do we actually do that reporting? Because my internal thoughts don't look like an English dictionary. When I have a complex idea, it doesn't instantly appear in my head as a perfectly formatted sentence.
And that profound realization brings us to the philosopher Jerry Fodor. Semraj highlights Fodor's concept of mentalese, which completely rewrites how we understand human communication. Fodor argues that the language of thought, the actual symbols, references, and representations happening inside your mind, is fundamentally different from the spoken or written languages we use in the outside world.
So mentalese is kind of like the raw, uncompiled code of human thought.
That's a great way to think about it. Fodor considers it the true natural language of the mind. The core idea is that you can perceive objects or conceive of incredibly complex, nuanced ideas, completely independent of English or Mandarin or Spanish. Your brain generates an internal cognitive content that exists entirely before words get involved.
I think everyone has experienced that. It's that tip of the tongue phenomenon. You know exactly what you want to say. You can feel the shape of the concept in your mind, but you can't find the English word for it. You are literally stuck in mentalese.
We've all been there.
If you're looking at a coffee mug on your desk, your brain registers the pure concept of that object without needing to spell out MUG.
Exactly. But if you want to ask me to hand you that mug, you are forced to translate your mentalese. You have to take this pure, rapid, internal cognitive state and squeeze it through the narrow bottleneck of words, semantics, and syntax. You're constantly translating your internal reality so that my external mind can attempt to understand what your mind is experiencing.
It's honestly a little isolating when you think about it. We're all just walking around translating our internal mentalese, hoping the person across from us decodes the audio waves correctly. And a lot gets lost in translation, which makes me wonder about the limits of what we are actually capturing in our minds.
Well, Semraj makes a crucial philosophical distinction here about the limits of our cognitive reach. He points out the massive, humbling gap between what we know and what there is to know. He separates truth from our knowledge of truth.
Meaning, reality just exists regardless of whether we understand it or not.
Precisely. Truth or absolute reality simply is. It exists independently of our carbon-based brains. But what we know about that reality is strictly limited. Our knowledge is constantly subject to addition, to revision, and sometimes to being completely overturned by new discoveries. What is out there to be known is absolute, but what we actually know about the absolute can never be absolute itself.
We only ever get a tiny slice of the pie, and we're constantly trying to bake a bigger one. So if our knowledge is this limited, and we have to translate everything through mentalese, how do we actually go about acquiring this data in the first place?
To explain the mechanics of acquiring knowledge, Semraj turns to the work of D.M. Armstrong. Armstrong breaks the process down into two distinct categories: perceptual consciousness and conceptual consciousness.
Let's start with perceptual.
Perceptual consciousness is how we interact with the physical world through our biology. Armstrong argues that to be conscious is to perceive.
But our perception isn't just a flawless 4K direct download of reality, is it? We have to process the raw data. Semraj uses the term transducers to describe our sensory organs.
Yes. Our eyes, our ears, our nerve endings, they act as transducers. They take physical stimuli from the outside world and translate them into signals the mind can interpret as color, sound, or texture.
And just like a corrupted hard drive or a faulty microphone cable, those biological transducers can seriously malfunction, which means we can perceive what is actually there, but we can also perceive something that is entirely distorted.
Give me an example.
Well, think about what happens when you have a terrible sinus infection. Your transducers are physically blocked. You might eat a rich piece of chocolate cake and be completely unable to perceive its sweetness, or bite into a lemon and not taste the sourness.
That's a perfect example from the text. The objective reality is that the lemon possesses the chemical properties of sourness. But your subjective phenomenal perception is flawed because your biological hardware is compromised. Or consider a mirage in the desert. Your eyes are accurately reporting the way light is bending through heat waves, but your mind interprets it as a pool of water that simply isn't there.
It really highlights a terrifying rule of human cognition. We absolutely have access to objective reality, but we only ever have access to it subjectively. We are entirely trapped behind the physical filters of our senses.
We are. But human cognition isn't restricted to just what we can touch, taste, or see. That brings us to Armstrong's second distinction, conceptual consciousness. This is where the human mind truly separates itself from the physical constraints of reality.
The sandbox of the mind.
Exactly. On a conceptual level, your mind can imagine, invent, and hypothesize things that completely defy physics. It's the ability to conceive of what is not as if it is. This happens entirely within the brain's internal cognitive workspace, completely independent of those faulty transducers we just talked about.
Semraj provides some incredibly vivid examples of this. You can, right at this exact moment, envision a BMW made entirely out of solid gold. You can picture the reflections on the hood, the weight of the doors, and you can just leave it at that conceptual level. You don't have to go out, mine the gold, and physically build the car to experience the idea of it. Your brain generates the reality internally.
The scope of this conceptual power is staggering. We can project our minds backward and forward through time. We can casually conceive of an era before there were any buggies or cars on the roads, effectively constructing historical realities we never personally witnessed.
My absolute favorite example Semraj uses is about family. He points out that you can conceptually conceive of a sibling you wish you had. You can imagine a brother or sister, picture their personality, think about the conversations you would have with them, and then, in a fraction of a second, you can negate them completely out of your mind. You just erase them. Poof, gone.
Philosophically, that specific example carries immense weight. It proves that human cognition allows us to conceive of something that does not physically exist as not existing. We have the cognitive power to hold the concept of a total non-entity in our minds. We are manipulating reality, creating and destroying universes within the confines of our own consciousness.
Okay, but this raises a massive red flag for me. If our minds are powerful enough to invent solid gold cars out of thin air, and our senses can be easily fooled by mirages, how do we ever know if what we are thinking is actually true? We've got all this internal mentalese, but how do we verify any of it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you've just hit on the ultimate problem of epistemology. And this drives us into the most crucial section of Semraj's analysis, the truth of cognition. Knowing whether what is known is actually true or false. Because you're right, you can hold a cognitive state, you can believe something with every fiber of your being, but that intense belief doesn't magically transmute it into a fact.
Right. We have to go back to Bertrand Russell here, don't we?
We do. Russell argued forcefully that while the human mind is a highly efficient factory that manufactures beliefs, the mind cannot be held responsible for the truth of those beliefs. Truth is an extrinsic matter. It exists completely outside of our belief in it.
We can't bend reality to our will just by believing hard enough, but that leads to a really interesting psychological debate about belief itself. Do we actually have control over what we believe? Like, if I wanted to, could I simply choose to believe that the sky is green right now? Because, honestly, I don't think I can. I can't just forcefully overwrite my own perception like that.
That exact tension is the heart of a historic philosophical debate between two camps. You have the volitionalists and the non-volitionalists. Volitionalists, championed by thinkers like Søren Kierkegaard, argue that humans absolutely have the capacity to hold beliefs willingly. They argue we can, in certain circumstances, simply choose to believe something, entirely without evidential consideration.
Like choosing to believe a close friend is innocent of a rumor, even before you have all the facts, you make a volitional choice to trust them.
Exactly. But I'm guessing you can see the counter-argument.
Yeah, the non-volitionalists probably absolutely hate that idea.
They do. Non-volitionalists, like the philosopher W.K. Clifford, push back intensely against that notion. They resist the idea that we can or should acquire beliefs independent of evidence. They argue that true belief should be a direct, almost involuntary result of being presented with undeniable, verifiable proof. You don't choose to believe gravity exists. The evidence forces you to believe it.
So who is right? Do we choose our beliefs, or does the evidence force them upon us?
To resolve this gridlock, Semraj brilliantly splits truth into two distinct categories, empirical truth and existential truth. And the category dictates the rules of engagement.
Okay, empirical matters are the verifiable things. For empirical truths, seeing is believing. If someone tells you it is pouring rain outside, you need the physical evidence of looking out the window to form the belief. In empirical matters, it's imperative to believe the evidence. You really don't have a choice. The evidence dictates the cognitive state.
Right. But non-empirical, or existential matters, operate on an entirely different set of rules. In existential matters, knowing is not necessarily believing, and most importantly, physical evidence cannot guarantee belief. The conscious self becomes acutely aware of when it is forced to believe based on empirical evidence, and when it has to make the active choice to believe without it.
Looking purely at the philosophical mechanics of faith, Somraj points to a few religious concepts to perfectly illustrate how existential belief works. He uses the Christian concept of creation ex nihilo, the belief in creation out of nothing.
It's a prime example because, by definition, this belief cannot have physical empirical evidence. As Samraj vividly illustrates, there is no factory floating in outer space that contains the physical templates for atoms, ants, antelopes, or humans.
Because it's a belief about the very origin of physical reality itself, you can't use physical reality to prove it. He also brings up the biblical narrative of Jonah and the great fish. Believers hold it as an existential truth that a man survived inside a fish's belly for 3 days. Now, if empirical evidence were the only valid basis for establishing truth, this belief would be instantly discarded, because all biological evidence dictates that no human could survive that environment.
And that is the absolute crux of existential truth. Semraj argues that in the realm of existential truth, no amount of evidence can force a guarantee of belief, and crucially, no lack of evidence can prevent it. Therefore, belief in God or adherence to any spiritual or philosophical framework can be held with, without, against, or entirely regardless of physical evidence. Reason and faith provide us with entirely different frameworks for why we hold a cognitive state.
It requires a leap of faith. Our brains are sophisticated enough to draw a line in the sand and say, I do not have empirical transducer-gathered proof for this concept, but I am making the volitional, existential choice to hold it as true.
It's a testament to the incredible flexibility of the human mind. We are not just biological calculators mindlessly computing sensory data. We are conscious entities capable of simultaneously navigating the verifiable physical world and the deeply unverifiable existential realms.
So, what does this all mean for you, the listener? When we pull all of these philosophical and biological threads together, the big takeaway from Samraj's work is that your carbon-based brain is an absolutely astonishing decision-making organ. Every single day of your life, it is seamlessly toggling back and forth. It processes empirical truths where you demand hard evidence like checking your bank account balance before buying something.
Always a good idea.
Yeah, highly recommend it. And at the exact same time, it processes existential truths where believing happens entirely without seeing, like trusting in the fundamental goodness of humanity or holding a religious faith. You are constantly actively managing what you know, how you know it, and whether you're choosing to believe it.
This raises an important question, and it is the truly provocative thought Samraj leaves us with at the very end of his analysis. Up until now, everything we've discussed has been an internal, private process. But cognitive neuroscience is advancing rapidly. We're now using highly sophisticated functional MRI technology to map psychological states directly to neural states in living subjects. We can essentially watch the brain light up as it thinks.
Right, we can see the literal blood flow of a memory or a cognitive state on a monitor.
Exactly. So Samraj poses this staggering hypothetical. As this technology becomes exponentially more precise, if we can reliably detect the exact moment a cognitive state solidifies into a belief state, can we eventually differentiate how that belief is held? Will an fMRI machine soon be able to scan your brain and definitively differentiate a belief you hold purely based on empirical evidence from an existential belief you hold without evidential consideration?
Oh, wow. That completely flips the script. So a machine could theoretically scan your brain and know whether you actually have proof for the claim you were making, or if you were just taking a massive leap of faith, it could decode the foundational architecture of your deepest, most private convictions.
It forces us to confront a wildly unpredictable future. A machine might one day be able to decode our mentalities and our cognitive states so perfectly that it knows that we know something or exactly why we believe something before our own conscious self even fully realizes it. It is the ultimate collision of advanced biological neuroscience and the philosophical KK thesis.
That is both incredibly thrilling and undeniably terrifying to think about. The idea of a physical machine reading the existential choices of our internal mental state feels like science fiction, but we are inching closer to the biology of it every day. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the absolute marvel that is your own mind. As you go about your day, we encourage you to keep reflecting on not just what you know, but how you know what you know. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep unpacking those cognitive states, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.